Welcome to Bound by Grace podcast. I'm Amber Hunt. Thank you for joining me. This episode is going to be my testimonial part one. Andrea's going to do her own testimonial episodes, and that way we're not limited by our timeline since we are in different time zones. So let's go ahead and dive in. I am a little nervous about sharing my testimonial, but I believe that it's for the good of our podcast, that it's going to help some listeners. At least it'll make you understand where I came from, what I've been through, but also maybe it'll resonate with you and you'll know that you're not alone. So, up until 10 years old, I lived with my biological mother. I would see my dad about every other summer or so, but I don't really remember much. She would drop me off occasionally if she needed to, and it would be without warning. I do remember going to my dad's for school one time, and she had just dropped me off, and it was not expected. And then unexpectedly, she would pick me up. So there was really no stabilization there. We moved a lot. She had a lot of boyfriends or husbands. Um, I remember very little from my childhood, and I attest that to trauma, which I will be working through with a therapist here soon called EMDR therapy. I'm really looking forward to it. Um, but when I moved in with my dad, God made a way at 10 years old for me to live with my dad. And when I lived with him, when I moved in with him, the day I moved in, I got off the plane. We walked to the house. Um, and I remember him taking my suitcase, opening it, shutting it abruptly, taking it to the backyard, and burning it. I had roaches and spiders in my suitcase. My clothes were completely torn up and dirty, and I was malnutritioned. They took me to a doctor, and I was actually diagnosed with malnutrition. And I had an insane amount of lice in my hair. And they had tried to get the lice out of my hair for a few years. They used the regular antidotes to it, but they also used kerosene. It got that bad. And I just remember how bad my scalp felt, how much it burned, how much it itched, how much it just was terrifying. Um, so I have a little bit of a phobia of lice. I remember when I was, I think, 14 or 15, I thought I saw a lice jump on my bed and I freaked out. I remember that feeling of just being terrified. And it's because I went through such a trauma of having it for so long, not being taken care of. When I lived with my mom, she would leave us, my brothers and I had two twin brothers that were roughly 7 years younger than me. She would leave us for weekends at a time, and I was under 10 years old, and she would leave me with my toddler brothers, and we wouldn't have anything to eat. So I remember going to the orange grove that we lived on and stealing fruit to be able to eat. So it wasn't the best upbringing. The things I do remember, no child should have to go through. A lot of domestic violence, seeing your parents, not my father, but my mother, have sex in front of me when I was very young, having multiple men just rotate through the door, my mom using drugs, illicit drugs in front of me, and us losing some items because of my ex stepfather having a drug addiction and coming in, breaking in, and stealing our items for money for drugs. I remember a time when I was sleeping in the house. I even remember the cereal I was having. It's that like vivid. I was having Cocoa Puffs and I went to bed, and then all of a sudden I hear my mom start screaming. And I walk into the kitchen, and my stepfather had a knife to her throat. So I got my brothers out and we ran to the neighbors and called the police. So lots of domestic violence, lots of neglect more than anything, and lots of codependence. Surprisingly, I felt like I was the mom. My mother was so reliant on me that I felt like I was the adult. I remember feeling that way when we were riding in a truck home from a place we shouldn't have been as at that age. And we were in the back of the truck. It was very, very cold. I was shivering. And there was only one jacket back there, or blanket. And I remember taking that blanket and giving it to her, and she took it willingly, even though I was a young child and she saw me shivering. She took that blanket and stayed warm while I was freezing. And I just thought to myself, I was taking care of her. So lots of trauma. But when I moved in with my father and my stepmother, it was a hard transition because I went from no discipline to all of a sudden being very strict and very disciplined. And I'm not saying that was wrong the way they did it. I still think that if God wouldn't have had me live with them, I can only imagine what my life would have been like up until this point. So I find it to be a saving grace that I moved in with them. They gave me stability. They showed me what love was, what it was like to be a child instead of a parent at a young age. Um, they gave me responsibilities. They taught me how to be a hard worker. And they're the reason I started going to church. So I would say I got saved around 13 years old. And then I got baptized at 15 alongside of my father and my mother, or my stepmother, who I now call mom. Um, I did start acting out at 15. There was an incident that occurred that was too big and would have brought CPS in because I was lying. And when that happened, my parents had no other choice but to kick me out to save the other children. But as a 15-year-old, it felt like I was being discarded. I understand the decision now as an adult, especially as a parent. But back then it felt like I lost their love. But then my grandfather stepped in, my dad's dad, and he took me in. And when he took me in, I just remember feeling so thankful. So I went to live with him and went to a Christian academy and learned about God even further and became very close with God. I had some friends, a small group of friends that I relied on when I went to school. From what I remember, I did quite well in school. I struggled a little bit, but there at 12th grade, I ended up doing quite well, where I started to enjoy academics. When I graduated, my biological mother came for the graduation, and we went to go see a couple of my friends. And when we got back, my grandfather had all of my items and hers on the lawn and wouldn't allow us inside to check to see if we had forgotten anything. He just kicked us out. I still to this day do not know what happened. Like, truly, what would possess someone to do that when I felt like everything was good, that we had a good relationship? But it was something about my mother being there that is the reason why we were kicked out. So fast forward a little bit, I moved in with my mother after graduation. I gained a lot of weight from depression. I I'm only 5'2" and I was 225 pounds. And I remember not even knowing that I was that big until my biological mom showed me a picture of myself at the beach in a bikini. And I didn't recognize who I was looking at. So I started going to the gym for 6 hours a day. I started working. I worked at Walmart and McDonald's, and I started going to school as a massage therapist. While I was going to school, I met my first love. We're gonna call him Steve, just to keep uh, things private for him. And he didn't speak any English. He was Dominican and Puerto Rican and did not speak any English. And I remember being so intrigued that he didn't go out of his way to make friends and be friendly, and that he couldn't speak English. And I thought that was a challenge that I wanted to take on. So I started to teach him English. We started hanging out. I felt really good that he was giving me his attention when he didn't give it to anyone else. And that's saying a lot. I think from just me wanting to be loved. And it doesn't necessarily mean he was good for me, because we went through things that would be considered sort of abusive. But the fact that he was giving me his attention, I thought that was love. So I started to go to his church and I started to learn Spanish. Don't ask me anything about Spanish now. I would not be able to tell you. It's definitely one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it. But back then, I could understand pretty much everything being said because I had been going to the church that only spoke Spanish for about a year. And in between that year, it was a Pentecostal church out of a house. Only Spanish people were there, or Hispanic people were there. And I was the only American. They had a lot of rules. Certain rules, I believe, were put into place by biblical reasons. Others, I feel like this could be considered an occult. And what I mean by that is, when I first started going there, I felt like myself. I was happy. I was outgoing. I made friends easily. For the most part, it's a matter of keeping them for me. But I really did change in a matter of maybe 3 to 6 months. I was so moldable, so gullible, that I'd believe anything they told me. One of the things was we weren't allowed to have sex before marriage. Okay, that's what God's word says. But Steve would go out of his way to visit me, and we would get handsy and do everything but have sex. And it made it where it was very difficult to keep that promise when you're playing with fire, basically. So I, of course, as a young girl with lots of hormones and someone giving me this attention, was willing to go whatever route he would go. And we did have sex, but it wasn't the normal way. It was more for his pleasure than mine. And unfortunately, he thought that that was okay. Throughout this process of about a year of dating, he would break up with me randomly. He would say that I wasn't following God's word, or I was acting a certain way, and he would just break up with me. But instead of breaking up with me and leaving it alone, he would come by my house and he would start to look in the window. And I remember seeing him one time look in the window. And then I remember being so obsessed that I would drive by his house and see if he was there. And that is obsessive. And it was unhealthy. And then he cheated on me and I forgave him, as if I was doing the godly thing. And what I mean by that is obviously God calls us to forgive, but God doesn't call us to be a doormat. So I was not bound to this man. We were not married. I should have seen the red flags and I should have had the confidence to move on, but I didn't. The last time he broke up with me, I remember coming home from work, driving on the road, and all of a sudden I hear all of these horns beeping at me. And I realized I was not on the road, I was on the sidewalk. And that's when I knew I had to leave. When I say they were in a cult, I mean that it became so strict that we weren't allowed to have friends outside of the church. And this was a small church. This had maybe 20 people in it. We weren't allowed to marry outside of the church. They thought that that was a sin. We weren't allowed to read anything other than what they were giving us. We weren't allowed to go to the gym because they say that it was changing the way God made our bodies. So it was an occult in my eyes. When I left there, I was not the same. We were only allowed to wear dresses or skirts. They had to be a certain length. We weren't allowed to cut our hair. We weren't allowed to wear makeup. They didn't want us to even pluck our eyebrows. But what was strange is they didn't want us to pluck our eyebrows, but it was okay to shave your legs. So that was very, just doesn't make sense to me. So they had a lot of rules. It made me change. I stopped having a sense of humor. I stopped enjoying things. I think some of it was the church. I think some of it was my relationship with Steve. And then finally, after that sidewalk incident, I packed my stuff up and I left that night. And when I left, I moved in with my sister in Raleigh. I drove all the way there. It was 12 hours and I didn't stop. When I arrived at my sister's, she got me a job. My car was very old, so it started to stop working when I arrived in North Carolina. Like the drive was just too much for it. What I didn't know at the time was all it needed was a battery. So it sat in my sister's driveway or parking lot for a while, and she would take me back and forth to work. One day, and everything seemed to be going fine with my sister. One day I was feeling down. I had met someone at a coffee shop. He was into music. I was a singer. I thought this was kind of a good meet, and he asked me to go to the club with him. Well, at this point, I was over 18, so I decided, okay, we'll go. So we went to the club. He was over 21, so he got me alcohol. It was my first time drinking, and there was a guy there. Tall, blonde, thin. He probably was about 19, maybe 20. And I was so down about what had happened in Florida with Steve that I got upset, almost numb, and I decided I'm going to have sex. I'm going to have sex for the first time. And I kept dancing with this guy. He was completely drunk. We got into his car afterwards. He drove me to his house. We were lucky that we made it to his house because I remember him driving and him driving erratically. And we get to his house and he has sex with me. It was definitely not the experience that I would have wished that my first time would have been like. It was very cold. There was no connection. And then he stopped in the middle of it and fell asleep because he was so drunk. And then he woke up about 4 hours later and started again with me being half asleep. So it was a bad experience, but in my mind, I was just getting it over with. So I went home to my sister's house and disclosed this to them. And that for some reason, I felt like that it was okay. Like I didn't need to be wooed. I didn't need all of these things. I didn't need to be in love. It was easier this way. I think I was just so hurt that this was the easiest way for me. And if I could talk to that little girl, I would have a lot to say to her because there was a lot of things that I went through that didn't have to happen. One day I was working at the place my sister got me a job at, and she was the manager. And we decided we were going to get the car fixed. So she jumped it, got it started, drove it over to me, and then told me to come outside, even though it wasn't my break, and then asked me to get in the car. We were going to drive it to the shop right around the corner. So I was already irritated that she told me to come outside because it was not my break and I was scared I was going to get fired. So I come outside and I tell her, okay, I'm coming, but I want to be the one to drive my car. And she refused to let me drive my car. So I got in the passenger seat. We were arguing. She kind of floored it while we were in the parking lot. And then we were arguing still. I didn't have my seatbelt on and she slammed on the brakes. And as she slammed on the brakes, my head hit the windshield. And on my way back, I purposely extended my left arm to hit her in her face on my way back into the seat. When that happened, she started to hit me and scratch me, and I started to try and block it. And then she called her husband, who was trying to be a police officer at the time, to come get her, stating that I had assaulted her. And a little part of this story that wasn't disclosed is that she had just found out she was pregnant. So it was a much bigger deal, especially to her husband, that this had occurred. So her husband comes and he instantly kicks me out of his house, and he takes my sister and they go wherever they went, I think home. And I took the car to the mechanic right around the corner. When I pulled up, I was bawling my eyes out. My brother-in-law has never used a cuss word that I know of in his life. He's very Christian, and he cussed me out. So I knew that it was really bad. So I sat in the mechanic's parking lot and just cried. And then in between tears, I was trying to tell him, I don't know what's wrong with the car. Could you please help me? And he came out and he goes, it just needs a battery. It's going to be about $100. And all I could think was, I just got kicked out of this house. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep this job. This might be my last paycheck. And I don't have the money if I want to eat. I didn't say that to the man, but he walked away and then comes back and he said, you look like you've been through it. This is on me. And I just felt like God had spoken to that man, because he took on that bill when he did not have to. I would have paid it. I would have been hurting afterwards, but I would have paid it. I wish I could go back and thank that man. He has no idea the impact he had on my life just for paying for my battery that day. So I kept working at the job for a little bit. Because of what was going on with my sister and I did stop working there. Um, but I went to go get my things from the apartment, and there was a police officer waiting for me. So he escorted me to go get my items from the apartment. Um, it was very embarrassing. I felt scared, especially with how young I was and never really in trouble with the police. And he stated that they're charging me with assault. So that put a lot of fear in me on where my life was going to end up for something that felt so small, that was going to change my life. So I then went and stayed in my car. It was winter, very, very cold. My car kept the heat on. I got a gym membership to shower in. I got another job at a hotel. And the guy that I met at the coffee shop that took me to go dance had contacted me. And I told him what had occurred. I had been staying in my car for about a week or two, and he offered for me to stay at his place. So I came to his place, started staying there. I was there for about 2 to 3 days. And all of a sudden, he comes in and he says, for me to stay there, I have to sleep in his room. And I felt so uncomfortable and sad. I was so, so sad that somebody would take advantage of someone that really needed help. So I obviously told him no. He got very angry, told me that I could no longer stay there, and he had a roommate. His roommate was from Morocco, spoke decent English. He was very nice to me, but he kept telling me how beautiful I was and kind of made me a little uncomfortable, but I was in a spot and didn't know what to do. So I started staying in my car again until my car broke down. It broke down and I was on the side of the road, did not know what to do. So I called the roommate, the Moroccan guy, and he came to get me. He took me to the hotel that we worked at. We had a discount. He paid for me to stay there that night, but he stayed there that night as well. And that was the first night that he raped me. When I say rape, I don't mean he held me down and it was this terrible act. It still was a terrible act. But I didn't give him permission. I did not okay it. I did not say yes. I sort of shook my head no, and I just stayed still. Some people fight, some people freeze. And unfortunately, my younger self, I froze. When we finally got out of the hotel, he said that he had a friend that had an extra room that I could stay in and pay rent. That he would pay rent for me to get started, and then I could just continue after. So I went to the friend's house, who was also Moroccan, and stayed there for, I would say, about 4 months. But the first night I was there, or maybe the second, the roommate came back over. We were sitting on the couch. He started rubbing my back. I didn't tell him to stop. Then he moved me into the bathroom and raped me again. It was this time a little more terrifying. He tried to go in anally and it hurt. It was painful, scary. He kept whispering in my ear behind me. It was definitely traumatic. So I stayed there with the roommate, or with the roommate's friend, continued to stay there. Eventually, the roommate stopped coming around, and the roommate's friend was the only one that I was dealing with. He started to show that he liked me. I started to feel obligated to give him what he wanted, to be able to have a place to stay. I wish I would have thought more about myself at that time. I wish I would have called my dad. I felt like I had nowhere to go. And I know that if I would have just picked up the phone and told him the situation, he would have taken me in. But that little girl didn't know that. She felt alone and like she had to do the things that she had to do to survive. So I stayed there for 3 or 4 months. Meanwhile, the charges for the assault were being dropped because I went and joined the Navy. Right when I signed up for the Navy, the petty officer in charge went to the courthouse and got the charges dropped. I was due to leave in December of 2007. I visited my grandma one last time, and then I left for basic training. When I joined the Navy, it was a really good experience. I would highly recommend that my children join some sort of service. I wouldn't say the Navy. I don't think it's family friendly with how many times they deploy, and sometimes they're not considered deployed and they're still on a ship. So I wouldn't say that that is the best route. I would say maybe the Air Force or Space Force. But I think that it's a really good experience. It makes you grow up. You have to have responsibility, but it's also great for somebody that doesn't have an idea of how to live on their own because it's structured. You're expected to be somewhere at a certain time. You're expected to be dressed in a certain way. And you always have someone looking out for you. When I was in boot camp, I was going through it. Nothing was bothering me. I remember getting off the bus, them sticking about 60 to 100-pound sea bags on the front of me and another one on the back of me and making us march through snow. The first thing we did. I remember that one of the petty officers in boot camp ended up getting discharged for the way he treated us. I remember him dropping me right after I had my wisdom teeth out. He dropped me, and I sweat so much because he had me in a plank for I don't remember how long, but the sweat was so much that it made my hands slip out beside me, and I ended up busting my nose. And then I remember him throwing a chair at someone and it coming maybe an inch from my nose. But the biggest trigger was when I was in line and people were talking and I was trying to tell them to stop talking. And of course, I'm the one that was targeted, just my luck. And he comes up behind me and whispers in my ear, "Shut the fuck up." And as soon as I heard him in my ear and felt his breath on my ear and felt the warmth of his body behind me, I had like a PTSD moment. I couldn't move. I couldn't shake it. Tears just started rolling down my face. So I started seeing behavioral health while in boot camp. They didn't help very much. It was kind of awkward to talk to them, but uh, it was probably better than not seeing them. After getting out of boot camp, I worked at a schoolhouse for gunner's mate on Great Lakes Naval Base. And I started experiencing whatever I could because it was so strict in my house. I felt like now is my freedom. I'm going to do whatever I want. And so I started to go to bars. I started to drink. I started to have sex with whoever I wanted. Drinking became so bad that I drank every night and would come in to the barracks drunk. And almost every night I had sex with someone new. And when I went into the barracks one time, the master chief was there, and he said that my roommate came to him and told him that I was coming in drunk every day. And he said that if this happens again, he's going to send me to AA. The next day, I went to a bar. While I was at the bar, I remember looking around, and this feeling came over me. I was not supposed to be there. I did not like the atmosphere. This is not who I wanted to be. So the next day, I started going to a church. Just a church off base. They would bus us. It didn't last very long. I had a hard time acclimating. I had a chip on my shoulder from my experience with the church in Florida. I remember a girl coming up to me. First thing she said to me was, "Have you found Jesus?" And as sweet as that girl was, my younger self just wanted to be a jerk. And I said I didn't know he was lost. And I remember her stepping back and looking at me confused and then just walking away. And I can only imagine the impact that had on her spiritually when all she was trying to do was bring people to Christ. But I was angry. I was more lost than I had ever been. So I stopped going to church after that and I started indulging again. The indulging started to slow down after I got hurt. I was drinking so much one night that I ended up slipping off of a stage, and a 245-pound man landed on top of me, and my shoulder and my head hit first, and I had a huge concussion and had popped my shoulder out of place. My eyesight changed after that. I needed glasses. Didn't need them before. Had headaches and went to go see the eye doctor, and they said, "Yep, you need glasses." So it did stop, or at least slow down after that. One day I went to my grandmother's to visit, and they had a break-in across the street. And I went to investigate because we were supposed to be watching that house for a neighbor. The police officer that showed up, we'll call him John. I instantly was attracted to him. And then I looked in the back of his police cruiser and he had military gear. So I asked him a little bit more about it, and he said that he was in the reserves or the National Guard, and that seemed like he had things together. I asked him how long he'd been in the police department, and he told me he just seemed to have it together. in what I considered together back then. So because of all the hurt and the hurt that I definitely caused myself, I decided to pursue him because he seemed together and safe. We talked about God. He was very much into church. I asked him out to go to the theaters for a movie, and we went. And then 4 times of seeing each other in 4 months, we married. I thought it was a safe choice. I thought it was a smart choice. I wasn't in love. I don't think I even really knew what love was right then. So I think this is going to be the end of this podcast episode. Look for episode 2, and I'll move into further of my background and my testimony. Thank you, and you guys enjoy your day.